Hey, how's it going? Today we are going to do our segment on Sartrean existentialism. What the heck is Sartrean existentialism? Well, it's a movement in philosophy that deals with this tricky issue of what freedom is. And Jean-Paul Sartre has been maligned by many different philosophers, and even himself at times, for many different reasons. People say he's not as deep as Heidegger, and he rips off other people's philosophy. However, one of the things he does is he provides an analysis of freedom, which suggests that freedom distinguishes human beings from all other stuff in the universe. This is a pretty provocative claim if it's true. And it's also a tricky, controversial claim because some philosophers claim that free will is an illusion, that there is no such thing as this freedom, which he assumes exists and is necessary for, every ethical system. Almost every ethical system assumes that people make choices. The famous ancient philosopher Epicurus, in his letter to Monosius, he says, "Some actions by humans are free, and to these we naturally attach praise and blame." Right? If someone has no choice in what happens, then it doesn't make sense to blame or praise them for anything. I think Epicurus is right, by the way, about that. So what is freedom? In English, people use the word freedom to indicate or mean at least 5 different things. And Sartrean existentialism is concerned with maybe just one of these, which is called sometimes metaphysical freedom. So you can think of the use of the word freedom. If someone's in jail, they're not free. Or if someone ties up your wrists and you're physically in bondage, then you're not free either. So those are 2 versions of the word freedom. But there's also civil liberties, right? Freedom of speech, expression, these kind of things. That's a type of freedom. And there's also maybe when people say free your mind, right? If you have a really distorted perspective in the world, maybe you're the source of misinterpretation because you have a warped perspective. So, free your mind. But Sartrean existentialism deals with the idea of so-called metaphysical freedom. So what the heck is that? Well, it's this idea that you can choose or do otherwise, and your life is not planned out in advance. Sometimes people ask this question when they approach philosophy: what is the meaning of life? And in a way, Sartrean existentialism engages that question. What is the purpose or meaning of your life? And he winds up claiming that you create the meaning of your life because you are free. You have this capacity to invent a life plan for yourself. And he winds up doing this. He distinguishes between these 2 modes of being, one of which is being in itself, and the other is being for itself. Only human beings have being for itself in this sense that is related to freedom. So he contrasts this with the world of objects, manufactured objects. And so he says, for example, I have these sunglasses, which are designed, they have a purpose. Their purpose is to shield my eyes from the sun. And so before these things came into the world, someone had a plan for what they were supposed to be, right? So Sartrean existentialism holds the idea that this plan is the essence. So for manufactured objects, the essence comes before its real physical existence in the world. In other words, there's a plan for what this thing is supposed to be before it was manufactured, right? So it's what it's supposed to be. Its essence precedes its existence. But for human beings, because they have free will, it doesn't work that way. Sartrean existentialism maintains that we are thrown into the world and we don't have an essence, but we carve out our own essences by our choices. So free will allows us to choose what kind of being we turn into. astonishing claim, right? And so this is a controversial issue. So in the history of philosophy, sometimes there's this distinction drawn between, and there's a bunch of different gradations of this, but you have these two extreme positions, one of which is hard determinism. And hard determinism holds that every event in the universe is causally necessitated by some prior event. And so if that's true, there's no free will. So when I think I'm choosing freely, I'm not really choosing freely. I'm a function of all these structures that influence my illusion of choice and make me even think I have free will, right? And then on the other extreme is the idea of a kind of radical free will where we can choose freely. And that's almost circular, huh? But so let me try to explain this in some other ways. Scientists are very good at figuring out cause-effect relationships, causal structures. And there's different types of cause-effect relationships. So think about who you are and where you are today. You're a function of psychology, genetics, physics, biology, neurobiology. All these things influence the kinds of choices you seem to make. Are these choices really free? Or are you just a function of all these cause-effect structures? So, for example, if you have a genetically caused disease, it's not like you can say, I'm going to choose not to have this disease. Well, actually, that's changed a little bit in the last couple of years with He Jiankui, the Chinese scientist who genetically engineered some infants to be resistant to HIV. So it's a unique time here in the early 21st century during pandemic where people have, through the CRISPR project, this tool of genetic editing. But in the past, you could never choose something like that. But, you know, you're also a function of real psychological causes. So people who suffer from PTSD, for example, right, they have trouble doing things because of some traumatic event. It's not like you can say to the people who have PTSD, oh, toughen up, cupcake, play through the pain, right? And you can, but psychological causes are real. Economic causes are real. If you don't have money, you can't do certain things. It restricts your freedom. And people who have brain damage, right, with all the data that's come out with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, right, when people get whacked in the noggin too much, sometimes it changes their personalities. And what does that mean? Well, how far down in the causal structure do you go and still have freedom of the will? I think I'm choosing freely, but a hard determinist might say, look, you're just a function of all these cause-effect relationships that make you do things. So before we cut out of here, he has this distinction between being in itself and being for itself. L'en-soi, being in itself, and le pour soi, being for itself. So human beings are able to generate relationships with their environment, right? And what that means is they have being for themselves in a way that, say, sunglasses don't. It has just being in itself. So on the one hand, we're like objects, right? You ever hear this, don't objectify a person, right? You were an object before I got here. You don't have to say that. But the idea here is that objects and humans both share this one mode of being called being in itself. But it's not like these sunglasses have being for itself. The sunglasses don't say, someday I'm going to turn into a windshield or a bigger object. But human beings make conscious choices in terms of what they are to become in the future. So Sartrean existentialism tries to rescue this idea that freedom is real, because sometimes people blame their environment and JPS says that is a cop-out. So, if you have any other questions about Sartrean existentialism's influence on literature or even rock music, if you check out the Canadian band Rush, they have a song named Free Will, which I suggest you listen to help understand Sartrean existentialism.